All right, up next we have Oliver Gale from Panther Protocol. Take it away. Thank you very much, man.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. How's everyone doing? I'm Oliver, CEO, co-founder of Panther Protocol. And in keeping with the theme of ETHDam, I'll be talking about the problems that we face in Web3 economies around privacy, how we can address them. Particularly, Panther is focused on preservation of alpha, reducing alpha decay for financial DeFi use cases in Web3. So, when we talk about the scale of the problem, 99.4% of assets on Web3 today are on pseudonymous public chains. So that's approximately $2.5 trillion worth of assets. The remaining assets would be on chains like Monero, Zcash, locked in TVL on something like Railgun, Tornado Cash, etc. So core to Panther's thesis is that the existing network effects of protocols like Ethereum are not going to be overcome. There are complementary solutions, sort of standalone L1s and L2s being built, which will provide end-to-end privacy. But meanwhile, there will continue to be a vast majority of liquidity held on pseudonymous ledgers, and that the solution, the long-term viable solution, is to bring privacy-enhancing technologies to existing liquidity and network effects, as opposed to building an entirely new infrastructure and asking liquidity to migrate. Some will, but the majority of liquidity on Uniswap, for example, is likely to stay on Uniswap. So, so there's two sides to it. The reason that I got into the privacy space in the first instance is the human rights, fundamental right to privacy, and the belief that a healthy society needs to have a fair balance of power, and that a surveillance state erodes our rights, our personal liberties, our right to vote without being subjected to coercion or oppression. So this is the reason number one for doing it. Like going through this journey now, it's been about 4 years building Panther, and sort of when you get into the problem, solution, product market fit space, we realize that most people actually are not concerned about their personal liberties. They just want a product that works. And so when we looked at who's likely to be the actor that has a problem that really needs privacy from a financial perspective, it would be asset managers, brokers, financial institutions, those players who have a competitive edge or alpha on the market, who suffer at the hands of things like a pseudonymous ledger or a mempool that broadcasts not only what they're doing, but who they're doing it with and to what extent. So solving these financial use cases is the sort of first use case for Panther. So, when you look at solutions that bring privacy to a protocol like Ethereum or other pseudonymous smart contract protocols, the first thing that probably comes to mind is Tornado Cash. And Tornado Cash, exemplifies what, when we started building, we hypothesized may happen, probably would happen, which would be that this decentralized on-chain mixer would attract illicit funds and then be subject to like law enforcement, regulatory enforcement. And so, of course, that happened, and even worse, the personal liberties of some of the development team have been, threatened now, and they find themselves in a place where they risk losing their personal freedom, which is an ideological and something that we strongly believe is unfair and prejudicial and a violation of human rights. But that's not what, this presentation is focused on, except insofar as a builder, myself, and for our team, we have to be conscious of the landscape that we're building in. So when you build what effectively is an on-chain mixer, you then have to deal with threats to your personal liberties. And what I think is equally compelling is the commercial viability of a system that, in practical terms, has been sanctioned. And when I say like commercially viable, what I'm talking about is 30,000 licensed financial institutions globally, 60 million point-of-sale terminals that accept Visa, MasterCard, American Express, etc., day-to-day use mainstream adoption of blockchain technology for payments and financial use cases. So if you don't have a compliance system and framework which is adequate for these 30,000 institutions, realistically, you're building a niche solution for hardcore users, and you're not building something which has practical application in people's day-to-day lives. So the core Panther's design thesis from 2020 when the project started was, how do we reconcile privacy and compliance infrastructure, which is now a popular discussion point, particularly post-Tornado Cash. But from our perspective, having been building Web3 financial infrastructure for over a decade, it was like obviously, compliance officers don't approve infrastructure that is going to expose them and the institution. So any system needs to prevent bad actors from abusing the system, and it needs to navigate regulatory ambiguity. So travel rule is a very painful prerequisite to solve for. But I think if you want to generalize the problem, our view as well is that, look, there's a huge diversity in geographies, and then there's a huge diversity amongst the financial institutions. They have different products, different risk appetites, even when they have the same products, different human beings managing your compliance system. And so fundamentally, if your compliance system isn't modular and agnostic to their requirements, then you're not going to be able to create a one-size-fits-all. So our philosophy is, it's not sufficient to have, it's not sufficient or appropriate to have sort of compliance by committee, which is what I've seen a lot of in the sort of Web3 on-chain mixer space. So you need, affordability is important. Panther uses EK snarks. This type of computation can be expensive. That's, any financial service should make sure it's price sensitive. Sufficient anonymity set and integration with existing DeFi protocols. So when it comes to the anonymity set, this is something that is a big problem. It's the network effect that essentially any sort of on-chain shielded pool solution needs to generate and foster. And in some systems, you'll find that, for example, something like Tornado Cash, they have to bootstrap a privacy set for ETH, and then they have to do one for USDT and one for USDC. That's a problem because the long tail of assets in Web3 will not have the same network effect and may never accrue the necessary network effect to offer true privacy, because functionally you're talking about statistical privacy. You're not talking about absolute privacy. I don't think you're ever talking about absolute privacy. There's always some information leakage. So Panther addresses the anonymity set with what is called a multi-asset shielded pool. So our shielded pool can accept NFTs, ERC20 tokens, other token standards, and they all share an anonymity set, which is driven by the quantity of liquidity held in the smart contracts as TVL and also the transaction throughput. We also address something else, which is the anonymity set across the financial actors, which is part of our core design. So in one sentence, Panther is a privacy primitive for DeFi infrastructure that offers modular compliance systems. We have a number of services. I think it's on this slide. So the shielded pool is the multi-asset shielded pool. We have DeFi adapters. Adapters are integrations into third-party smart contracts that allow you to essentially route your transaction to the third-party financial service, execute it, and return the output to Panther Protocol. So we've built adapters so far for Uniswap, Paraswap, QuickSwap, and KyberSwap is in process. We're focused at this moment in time on building the adapters into the DEX ecosystem. But functionally, you can build an adapter into any smart contract protocol if it involves some token mechanic. It could be a security token. It can be a native gas token or anything in between. Decentralized KYC. Panther is built Our sort of V1 protocol will have an integration with the integrations done with Purify. They're an on-chain compliance provider. We built the ZK circuits to allow a user to self-submit KYC information through the Purify protocol. Checks are run based on conditions which are set by the zone manager. The user is given a zero-knowledge credential, and they can use that credential to access zones. And zones are the compliance, like they're the core building block of the compliance system. So what a zone is a logical partition of the shielded pool. Every zone has a zone manager. The zone manager has a zone ID. Every UTXO in the shielded pool is assigned the zone ID as well as a transaction identifier as well. And the zone manager is responsible for setting the compliance systems and thresholds, so they will determine what the prerequisites are to enter what essentially is a walled garden. By default, everyone is excluded, so you can say Panther operates on inclusion sets. The zone manager defines what's necessary to enter the zone. They define the transaction limits. They define whether zones can do inter-zone transfers. So if you think of things like payment networks operating in consortiums or asset managers with portfolios in different jurisdictions, you may configure different zones for each of these use cases, jurisdictionally or by type. And the zone manager also is responsible for data management. So if you think about a universe of zones, they all share, first of all, the same shielded pool, which is really important. If we're talking about Panther supporting theoretically every financial institution on earth, we're not asking each of them to bootstrap their own anonymity set. Not across assets, and also not within each zone. That would be most likely an insurmountable challenge for most of them. Every zone shares the anonymity set. The key is none of the zones share users and none of the zones share transaction outputs. So from a compliance perspective, and we've been having these discussions with governments, banks, asset managers, brokers. We sit down with them, and I think this is the sort of diagrammatic infrastructure that we begin the conversation with. This is sort of what I'm mentioning. This system works from a compliance perspective, and it works from a product perspective for financial institutions. The institution can utilize the Panther compliance layer and integrate their own compliance system. So you may have, all the way on the left side of the spectrum, a DAO may say, we're going to use this infrastructure. We're going to deploy a compliance system, which is connect your wallet. And the data storage system is, we don't store the data, and they can operate that. The key here is that the zone manager, whoever that entity or group of entities is responsible for this infrastructure, which is critical. On the other side of the spectrum, you can be the most regulated financial institution and say, we have existing compliance systems. We don't wish to change anything. We're not interested in migrating our compliance on-chain. Everything is as is. We need it to be that way. We're interested in on-chain private execution for protection of our portfolio alpha, for example. Panther supports that as well. They may say, we want the data stored on-chain. Panther's built an MPC data safe for our V1. That's one implementation. Data can also be stored off-chain. And then the rest of the diagram sort of indicates that this, in this case, institutional zone can do private peer-to-peer transactions between users within the zone or across zones. They can do what we call Z-swaps, Z-trades, which are peer-to-peer swaps within a zone, and then they can do Z-swaps, which are swaps which are routed through adapters to third-party AMMs and central limit order books on-chain. And so we're agnostic in terms of what adapters can be built, what compliance systems are integrated and deployed. And then there's a couple of other cool features that we had to build in order to facilitate a better privacy product. So one is account abstraction. Relayers are responsible for paying gas fees. Relayers can accept different forms of payment. When I have a conversation with a broker, they're typically not interested in using a gas token. The accountant doesn't want to manage it. The volatility it may be prohibited under the regulatory guidelines, so being able to pay in something like a stable coin is a useful feature. The other thing we've done is introduce this. The Relayer network also has what we call a Z-miner. Z-miners are essentially a network of nodes who are responsible for batching transactions. And so a batch can be one transaction that's going to be more expensive, but if the use case is price sensitive and not so time sensitive, you can batch transactions together, and so this brings down the cost of execution. I can't say with certainty whether the cost is actually cheaper on aggregate than a native transaction. It's going to be interesting to see if actually there's a configuration where Panther can say it's cheaper to process transactions through Panther, whilst also delivering a compliance gateway and a private product execution environment. So this is the competitive landscape that we're operating within. This diagram is the byproduct of some research that Greenfield did. Greenfield is not an investor into Panther, so that was great because the competitive matrix wasn't done by us and it's still favorable. Basically, Panther differentiates itself on the compliance systems, which are driven by the zone management system. There are also some other things we do in terms of rate limits and RPC inspection. We have selective disclosures, which is this sort of the de facto system that privacy mixers are relying on today is, hey, the user has full sovereignty, however they can disclose. Sort of, as I've pointed out, that doesn't work. Like you simply are not going to be able to get mainstream financial actors to adopt a system where you say, yes, we understand North Korea may be running transactions through these pools, but Alice and Bob, your users, or we can prove that we're not party to that. It's ideologically, maybe it's sufficient, but in practice, it's not commercially viable. Their privacy systems are very hard to, in today's moment in the industry, to even get a financial institution to consider. If you want to get them to integrate and adopt it and do things like prevent every single transaction you've ever done being published on chain, connected to your MasterCard account, and then statistically inferred and sold by Nansen or Arkham Intelligence or all the other actors who make money out of this. It's not going to be done by having sort of a generalized homogeneous mixer. Our testnet is live. As I mentioned, we've been in development for just about 4 years. It's been a long time. We've had to really pivot the product stack. Initially, the V1 of the protocol was designed to be retail focused, so we also were of the paradigm and view that a selective disclosure would be sufficient. Post-Tornado Cash, we've somewhat inverted the strategy, but with zones sort of enabled more or less a configurable infrastructure. We just deployed stage 5 testnet last week, and we have, last I checked, 3,000 testers. We had 200 in January, so it's been more than doubling every month, which is great. We're gonna have another 4 to 5 testnet stages, so mainnet is scheduled for developers may say May, I think it's more like June, maybe July. And in connection with that, we have a lot of activity ongoing in terms of deployment of the testnet, but also branding overhauls, announcing the foundation, open sourcing the technology stack, and essentially decentralizing what has been a very incognito project for quite some time now. So you can get involved by going to pantherprotocol.io. That's going to be panther.org shortly, and getting involved in testnet or talking to me or reaching out, joining our socials, whatever you want. Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah. Hold on, I'll come over with the mic.
Thank you for the talk. So if Zone A and Zone B share the same shielded pool, then can I say that a withdrawal from Zone A is indistinguishable from a withdrawal from Zone B?
Yeah, if you're looking at it from an outsider's perspective, the zones are not distinguished. So they're all within the Panther smart contracts, all held within the Panther vault. So there's no external identifier that will say this is Zone A's user and this is Zone B's user. Zone B can say that it's not their user, and Zone A can definitively say, yes, this is my user and I know everything about them. So from the perspective of Zone B, they will be able to say, well, that's not us, but it doesn't go beyond that.
So it is possible for Zone B to distinguish between two withdrawals.
Zone B can say, this is not my withdrawal.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, one more.
Yeah, so I'm keen to learn more about how the KYC is managed from the perspective of you guys receiving a subpoena from some alphabet soup agency. So it looks like you mentioned maybe the KYC is offboarded to some decentralized platform or another provider. So I'm curious to get some more information on that.
Sure, yeah. So version 1 of Panther, which is what we're going live with, is going to be, well, it may be governed by the Panther DAO. That in itself is a whole political subplot. It may not be. It may be governed by some other entity. Our responsibility as developers is to develop this IP and hand it over to the foundation. The foundation decides what happens thereafter. The objective is that it's open sourced. And the objective thereafter is that it's useful and that the market sees utility in deploying zones. So what we have done for, call it, the Genesis zone, is we've integrated with Purify. So they would be an integration partner for an on-chain deployment. And Purify essentially is a DAO and set of smart contracts that route to Web 2 solutions and Web 3 solutions for Web 2.5 solutions for things like KYC onboarding, transaction monitoring, sanction screening, etc. So they have the KYC, KYB tooling, and they have the transaction monitoring tooling. If a zone is run by a DAO, and the DAO sets limits which are going to be determined by their governance structure. Let's say it's, photo ID, basic information, sort of standard verification. The DAO is the one who is taking custody of the information. And so the DAO has essentially the decrypt key, and that KYC information is stored in terms of the transactions on-chain in encrypted format. And as it pertains to the sort of, say, like a photo ID or onboarding information, that would be held by the KYC processor, which in this case is Purify, but it will be accessible through the DAO's decryption keys. That's
Okay, I'm really sorry to have to cut you off there, but we have to get on with the next one.
Okay.
I'm really sorry.
No worries.
I'm sure you're around, hang out outside
yeah,
for more
that's
questions
fine.
and stuff.
Yeah, any more questions, you can find me.
Thanks
I'll
very
be
much.
hanging around. Thank you.